Hi, everybody, and thank you very much, Emily, for the very kind invitation to take part in this webinar. And as you've mentioned already, what I'd like to do is just spend a few minutes putting witnessing into some sort of context in terms of where we are today. Firstly, it's important to remember that as humans, we're not infallible and we are going to make errors. And I'm sure many of you will have seen this particular slide before. I've seen it thousands of times and I still can't work out how it works, but it certainly shows just how easy it is for the human eye to be confused. Perhaps as a better example of our infallibility, I'd like to show you these data from a large centre in the UK, a centre that was doing perhaps 2,500 cycles a year, something like that. And you can see in this top graph the number of witness points that the RI witness system recorded on a monthly basis over a period of nearly 4 years. And then you can see on the graph underneath now the number of mismatch events that the system also recorded. And it's interesting that although there are perhaps only 1 or 2 or at most even 3 mismatch events, these being perhaps where an embryologist has got the wrong tube or dish out of the incubator. And although there are only a handful each month, what's important is that the mismatch events continue. They happen virtually every month, and this equates to a mismatch incidence of round about 1 in 5,000. And others have reported similar sort of incidences of mismatches in their own labs. So in 2002, back in 2002, this was all brought into very sharp focus when a white couple gave birth to black twins following treatment at a centre in the north of England. And I'm sure many of you, or some of you, will certainly remember what a dreadful time that was for the whole field of assisted conception, but in particularly for embryologists. But importantly, mistakes continued to be made, and I guess barely a month goes by really where somewhere around the world a mistake has happened in an assisted conception unit, and with often devastating consequences. And indeed, only just less than a year ago, there was an incident in the US when a woman in New York gave birth to twins, and the twins weren't related to her nor her partner, and remarkably the twins were neither related to each other, so really devastating consequences. So just going back to 2002, and in response to the black twins incident, the HFEA issued a requirement in the UK that in simple terms, all points at which a mistake could potentially happen, a mix-up could happen, that this should be witnessed. And this was incorporated, first of all, into the 6th edition of their Code of Practice that was published in 2004. And this, in essence, required that these procedures were manually witnessed. And you perhaps remember that in the Code of Practice, phrases like "in the presence of at least 2 members of staff" or "witnessed by an appropriate person" were mentioned. Around the same time, electronic witnessing systems were being developed, and our eyewitness being one of those. And in response to this, the HFEA pulled together an advisory group on safety and new technologies, the SANT group as it was known, and you can see the remit for that group on the slide there. And the HFEA's advisory group effectively decided, after much consideration, that electronic witnessing was indeed at least as good as manual witnessing. and was safe to use, and as we're all very familiar with now, it's now enshrined in their code of practice, and there is a whole chapter on witnessing and assuring patient and donor ID. And again, we'll be familiar with the things that we now are expected to witness as we go about our work, although I suppose not many of us will be witnessing the transfer of nuclear material. But we now face a new set of challenges, I think, for the lab. And I'd just like to mention a couple of those in relation to witnessing and to electronic witnessing. Firstly, I think it's important to remember that the lab itself is pretty safe. We almost invariably have HEPA filtration, which will make the air extremely clean and likely virus-free. And of course, as the evidence stands at the moment, there appears to be minimal risk from gametes, embryos, and blood, etc. So the problem is caused by the humans that are in the lab or near the lab, and as such, we need to find ways to reduce as far as possible, I think, that face-to-face interaction, be that between patients and staff or between the staff themselves. And there may be ways, and I'm sure many of you are now thinking about this or doing it, of having people working on their own or in smaller teams and altering shift patterns. And just a couple of other challenges that present themselves. We now are required or expected to perhaps wear masks more than we would have done before. And of course, this can make verbal communication less effective in our labs, which are often quite noisy. And although we should be wearing gloves for most of the lab procedures, it's still prudent to touch equipment as infrequently as possible. And of course, that equipment needs to be easily decontaminated. So key to this, I think, is that any changes that we do make in the way that we run our labs in relation to witnessing, for example, mustn't compromise safety, and in relation to witnessing, mustn't increase the chances of a mix-up. So this photograph of an embryologist manually witnessing a procedure, I guess, pretty much sums up what we now can't do. These two embryologists are necessarily very close to each other. They're not wearing gloves or masks. They're holding paper and a plastic wallet that the patient records go in, which will invariably have been touched by others many times throughout the treatment cycle. We'll be aware, of course, that the professional bodies in the UK, ARCS and the British Fertility Society, in collaboration with the HFEA and supported by the HFEA, have issued best practice guidelines. And within that best practice guidance, which is similar to guidance issued in Europe and America, there is a specific recommendation that electronic witnessing systems be considered. So I'm going to leave it there, and I'm very much looking forward to listening to Louise and hearing about how RI Witness has been introduced into the Care Fertility Group. Thank you very much for your attention.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me okay? Just checking whether people can hear me. I can't hear anybody.
Hi, Louise. Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, thank you, Emily. Thanks. Sorry, I've been badly let down by my technology today. We've had a couple of incidents and a little bit of a stressful start to the day. So unfortunately, I'm presenting this on my iPad and I can't actually see myself. So I've got Chelsea on WhatsApp letting me know if I drift off screen. But yeah, very pleased to present to you Care Fertility's experience of implementing the RI Witness system into our clinics. just a little bit of background about myself. Thank you, Emily, for the introduction. I have been an embryologist for 25 years, and Steve and I have spoken about this before. We are kind of the ancient generation of embryologists now who do actually remember a time before witnessing, before the compulsory witnessing and the recording of witness steps. Certainly when it was introduced in 2002, after the incident, I was actually working in a lab as a lone embryologist. I didn't have anybody in the lab permanently to witness. And it did seem like a real an inconvenience, really, an extra step. You know, we were the scientists, we knew what we were doing, and yes, it was a very serious incident, but it would never happen to us. And I think it's maybe while you listen to this presentation to the younger embryologists to just think about what you're doing in terms of your witnessing system. It may be that since you began training, you have only ever had manual witnessing there with you, or electronic witnessing. But just question the system, question how that witnessing is carried out. And just as obviously going through the implementing the electronic witnessing throughout care, I think it's been a good opportunity for us, actually, a good shake up to actually think about our practices, why we're witnessing, how we're witnessing things, how we're recording things. And as Steve said, and Robbie said in his talk last week, the HFEA seem very comfortable now with the concept of electronic witnessing. Certainly within the care group, we're moving towards being paper light, so not having so much paperwork, certainly not having clinical notes. Everything is on our computer system. So to have the ability of recording a second witness, even when we get a manual witness for certain procedures, we can still record that electronic signature, rather than having a piece of paper and constantly having to write the date and the time, and having lots of bits of paper around. So yeah, just have a little think. Nobody comes into the lab in the morning thinking, oh, today I don't think I'll witness very well. Everybody is doing their best and trying to comply with all the regulations, but we know some days things just happen. That's just the nature of things, and I think we just need to look at the system, look at what our eyewitness can do, and if you use it to its full capacity, then you know it does provide reassurance for yourself, reassurance for patients, but hopefully you'll see a little bit more as I go through. So hopefully I am able to move on the slide. It's not ideal with an iPad, so let's just see whether I can move on, otherwise I will possibly have to hand back to Chelsea to help me move the slides on. Sorry, Chelsea, will you take control of the slides and move it on for me? So yeah, just what I'm going to be talking about through the slides. If you could just move on to the next slide, thanks. During this presentation, I'm going to look at some of the considerations that you might want to look at when choosing a witness system, go through the pre-installation process, which is actually one of the key points of installing electronic witnessing. The installation process I'll talk about a little bit, and then the post-installation validations, and maybe some of the considerations and developments that you might want to look at. But yeah, we're a large group of clinics within the UK and Ireland. We're 11 clinics now, 12, 13, just acquired another clinic to make it up to 13. So yeah, we we're very fortunate actually that when Bath and Chester joined us, they already had the witnessing system, the RI witness system. So we've been able to learn a lot from that. But also Birmingham has only ever had RI witness. They've got lots of experience using it with our SOPs, so that's been really valuable as well. And if you could just move on, Chelsea, you'll see that we've installed the clinic now in 8 of the clinics. And if you click on again, we'll highlight the ones where we've got another 4 more to go. We were hoping to be finished by August, but obviously the shutdown, the lockdown of all the engineers and staff and things has obviously pushed that on. But we're hoping to have completed all the installations by October, I'm hoping. So yeah, if you could just move on to the next slide, Chelsea, and just show that I didn't make this decision alone. We have lots of focus groups within care, and luckily enough, we were able to set up a witnessing and traceability focus group with representation from all of our clinics. To have a look at electronic witnessing, look at what we wanted to get out of a witnessing system. If you can just move on the slide, it will show some of the considerations that we looked at when assessing what we wanted from the witnessing system. It's obviously got to be easy to use. We're, I think, getting towards 80 embryologists within the care group now, so training is a big thing. It's massive to undergo a training for 80 plus embryologists and all the technicians involved. So it had to be easy. We had to know that we were going to be able to train everybody. It was going to be a massive project. The traceability and stock control was a big thing as well. It's really nice to have electronic traceability, and the RI Witness does offer the option of logging your stock as it comes in, and so giving you that function to have stock control. Yeah, the installation process we had to consider. It was going to be disruptive for the clinics for a while, which we had to take into consideration, and also integrating it with our existing IT system. It's I would say we have our own IT system, our own in-house patient information system, and I would say that it's really important, if you're considering electronic witnessing, to get your IT chaps on board with it right from the beginning. We wanted to be able to push the information into the RI Witness database straight from our IT system, and I would say the IT aspect of things has been one of the most challenging things. Obviously, definitely at the moment, where they're very focused on getting people working from home and keeping our our system going with people not all being in the clinic together. It's been a really big drain on their resource, and they've obviously not got as much time for this project, but step by step we're getting there. But I would say right at the beginning, get your IT on board. So yeah, the other bits are just things that are nice to have. The customer service, getting your consumables on time. I know we've all had that, the issue of having to chase things, and you don't want to have your witness system based on something that you have to chase and constantly have problems with supply. So that reliability was a big thing. Developments and new features, obviously we always want to move it forward. We always want to be able to add our own bits and pieces to it. So yeah, and freezing and thawing and the tracking of embryos was a consideration, as well as obviously being able to have a reporting system where you could do your audits. So thanks, Chelsea. So just to give you an overview of the system for people who have not used it, you can move on to the next slide, sorry. It's based on a tag system, an RFID tag that's placed on, so your workstation becomes a tag reader. So all your dishes are labelled with tags, and as you bring the tags into the workstation, the workstation will read the tag and identify who that tag's assigned to. This is the cryo-labelling side of the system, which is a barcode system that relates directly to the tags. So you can go from a tag to a barcode, and then when you're thawing your embryos at the other end, the barcode will lead onto a tag, which is a great system. And the next slide just shows that you can actually identify the embryo number via the RFID, the barcode. So you can see that you can have a barcode that will link directly to embryo number 2, for example. You can mark that embryo as available for the patient to use, and then when you come to thaw the embryo, the system actually tells you that yes, that embryo is for that patient, it is the right embryo number, and it has been reviewed and been shown to be available. So this is really useful for our PGT programme, where we can actually mark within the RI Witness system when an aneuploid results comes back, and we want to mark that embryo as unavailable for patient use. So if somebody tried to use the barcode reader to thaw that embryo, then it would alert them to say. So yeah, just moving on to the installation now. The biggest part really of the pre-installation is the site visit and setting up the SSP. It involves going around each of the workstations, looking at what activities are carried out at that workstation, and then you can specify what hardware, what equipment you want to have at that workstation to make the system usable for that activity in the work area. So this might involve, for example, a barcode reader being at that work area if you're freezing sperm or embryos or thawing, or an admin card reader to have in the workstation where you're doing embryo transfers or egg collections. So I think the next slide just shows you a couple of considerations that you might want to think about when you're looking at your workstations. We were lucky enough to have some new hoods with integrated RFID readers that you can see on the left there. But you can also have the sit-on, the retrofit workstation reader. It sits within your hood. Obviously you switch off the hood heated stage, and that becomes your heated stage with the integral tag reader. And at the bottom there is the andrology reader that you would use to you can use to do your andrology. So you have one of those in every area where you're going to do sperm preps or tubes, then you can use that one. So yeah, another consideration is where you're going to have the screen. The screen is a key part of the system, so you have to have it so it's positioned, I don't know, maybe you want it positioned where you've always had the screen because that's where you automatically look to. Maybe you want it mounted onto the microscope so that it's within your eye line, as it shows in the middle there, which is a really nice feature. I do like that, but obviously you have to be able to have a hood where you can actually get your arm within the hood and reach up to the screen. So sometimes they're just freestanding, like it showed in the andrology one. I think Chelsea's having problem controlling my slides. I do very much appreciate her bearing with me. So on the next slide, you can see that it gives you just an idea of the different kind of tags that you can use on your dishes. You might decide just to stick with one type of tag, but there's a range of tags that you can look at and see what's going to be best for you. The rectangular tags are the tags you have to use for the tubes, so they can be read in the vertical readers, but yeah, the other tags you can to some extent mix and match. So yeah, I think the next slide is the installation part. So you have your SSP, all your hardware arrives, and on the date that you're going to install, the engineers and the product specialists come along, and as how it's worked within care is, as the installation's been going ahead, then the training has gone hand in hand with that. So it's quite an intense week. This is an engineer who's done quite a few of our installations, and they're really good. You can't see his face because he's our engineer. We don't want to share him. He's great. He's really went out of his way to make sure that all the wires were, as many wires as possible, were out of the work area. There was nothing cluttering up the work area, so that it was easy to clean. He's very aware of how the hoods are used. I mean, it is a little bit of shuffling around, installing one workstation, validating another, then another workstation's out of use. It's a hectic week. I'm not going to lie, it's intense. I'd say if you're wondering about how long it takes to install, then I would say about half a day per work area with the installation and the validation. I think if you kind of keep that kind of time in your head, sometimes it's quicker. Obviously the andrology workstations are much quicker, but if you've got an old style hood like the one that the engineer's working on there, where it just takes a little bit of fiddling with the wires and getting the equipment in place, I'd say about half a day per work area. So most of our installations have taken about 3 to 5 days from nothing in the lab to being, fully working and going live with the system. So I think the next slide is just showing a picture of one of the new hoods that we had with the integrated workstation. And you can see all the wires are out of the way. They've actually gone for one of the microscope mounted surfaces, which is really nice. And yeah, really, really pleased with the kind of final look of it and the way it works. I think the next slide is one of the hoods where we actually retrofitted the plates. So we switched off the heated plates within the hood. Obviously the light wouldn't normally be on, but just for the sake of taking a photograph, you can see how the barcode readers are nicely tucked away on the back. We've got the tablets up on the microscope again, but they're very easy to access, and you can see there's not a lot of wires everywhere. Yeah, we were really pleased with that. So I think the next slide is a text that I actually sent to one of the lab managers at the end of the installation week. I'm sure we can all relate to this. We have had days like this, but I'm not going to lie, it's pretty much a week where 2 or 3 days you feel like you've been through the absolute mill. But the engineers, as I say, work around you. It's just a little bit of shuffling. If you can reduce the amount of work that's going on, maybe just for one day, and have a really long day of just having all the workstations out of use, of being installed, that would be ideal, but it's obviously a little bit unrealistic. Some of our small clinics have been able to do that, and we've installed within sort of 2.5 days, but obviously it's not always going to be possible. So yeah, I think the next slide is just a little bit about the validation work that we did. Once the hoods are installed and the workstations are in use, we need to temperature map them. Each of the workstations, each of the reader work areas has 5 discrete heated areas that are all changeable, independently changeable, so you can absolutely tweak every part of the working area to get the temperature consistent right across the plate, which is a really nice feature. So we use the thermo buttons, so you can just see here we are validating the work area. When the engineer installs it, he will actually validate the work area, but with the flow off. So you just need to do your own validations, and obviously sometimes the temperature within the dish it needs to be slightly tweaked so that the surface temperature is different. And I think the next slide shows a hood that we actually temperature mapped a couple of years ago. And with the old style hood, which is shown on the right hand side, with the old style hood, all the areas weren't always independently able to be changed, so you just kind of had to compromise, and not all the areas were really usable sometimes, especially in the older hoods when the heating elements are not quite so predictable and controllable. But you can see on the right hand side, we did actually we were able to get the whole working area usable, very stable, really happy with that. So yeah, if you could just move on to the next slide. I'm not sure what it is, so I'll just have to wait. Oh yeah, this is a really big part of the installation, is actually getting your process map into your witnessing process map into the system. It takes a little bit to run through, but the product specialists, that this is their job. This is what they're trained to do, work through your SOPs and build up this process map from the way you work, so that literally every single process that you do that you're going to want to be able to witness is reflected in this map. It looks a bit scary, but it's just a one-off exercise that you go through and learn how to add bits in yourself if you wanted to do that. But it's actually really good. I really enjoyed doing that part of it. I love my process map and I'm very protective of it, but yeah, just on the next slide it shows you a little bit, just broken down a little bit, where you can see that you will allocate the sperm pot, and it just moves through a couple of the steps. So from the sperm pot, which is double witnessed, you then can go to your sperm wash, or to a gradient, or to a gradient and then a sperm wash, leading to your final prep. So each of those steps is reflected within the process map, and each of those steps can be witnessed. And you can have questions as you go along. You can have a second witness added if you wanted to always second witness your tubes, then you can add that, and the signature of that second witness is also electronically recorded. So on the next slide, I think I just have to wait for the next slide. I'm not sure what it is. Oh yeah, just a few considerations just to mention once you have got the system installed. I think the training is absolutely key. I think certainly we're learning as we're going through the clinics. Everyone has a different way of learning. Some people are very hands-on and need to do it themselves before they can understand it. Some people want to see the SOP and really read it and study it. and Cooper have actually done some training videos now, so those are going to be a really handy resource to be able to for the people who like to just watch things over and over just to solidify it in their head. I think they're going to be a really good resource. But just, yeah, bear in mind the training aspect of things. Whoever's going to be kind of an administrator, they'll get advanced training, so they can do things like tweaking the process map if there was bits and pieces that you needed to change. Obviously, the technicians will get the training for the traceability elements, and everybody gets training on how to open batches and things. You might want to consider patient information documents. I know some of our clinics, they give all patients the information about the electronic witnessing. Other clinics like to have the information available, and if the patient asks, they're happy to go through it with them, but they don't, bring it to the attention. I think that's just something that's a clinic preference, really. The report aspect of things is really useful for our witnessing audits. You can get your mismatch reports and your admin assign reports, and from that you can see if there's any trends or any learning issues as well. Certainly, if you're thinking about installing it within a group of clinics, there is an element of adapting depending on whether there is a larger or smaller clinic, and what staff you have available there. As a group, care, we're a very standardised practice within care. We all have the same SOPs, we use the same consumables, the same media, so there's a high level of standardisation. So our process map is essentially the same between clinics. The equipment's the same, the way we log on is the same. Is that it's just means that the embryologist can travel between clinics and not have to understand how things work in the other clinic. Especially for me, whose job it is to travel between clinics, I like to know that it's going to be the same at every clinic. And yeah, it's been a compromise in some places, but as I say, we've had Bath and Chester and Birmingham have got a lot of experience with the system, and we've been able to learn a lot from them, and just adapt it to the way we work. And just to mention as well the consumables, just to I think on our first install that we did slip up a little bit, not realising quite how many tags that we had available, and getting obviously the cryo labels for the Brady printer and things. It's just little things that you learn as you go along. But I mean, with next day delivery, it's it's been absolutely fine. But it was just thought I'd put that on the list of things for you to just bear in mind if you were thinking of introducing the system. So yeah, I think the next slide is maybe a little bit of a curveball. If I've got time to just digress a tiny bit, maybe, I don't know. So I'm sure somebody will let me know how. This is a picture of Emma Stone winning her Oscar in 2018, I think it was now. And I'm sure you would all remember that the next award that was presented was for Best Film, where the wrong film was read out. A card was handed to the person reading out the card, and because the wrong card had been given to him and the cards were not clear, not clearly stating this is the card for Best Actress, then they read out the wrong film. And again, this is an example of where people do get distracted. I mean, who would think that the biggest high profile event in the world, and somebody can get distracted by Emma Stone walking off the stage with her Oscar, and the person was actually tweeting on his phone as the next person went up to read out the card, and was distracted by tweeting on the phone and gave him the wrong card. Obviously my job is driving around, and I do like to listen to podcasts, and this actually, there's a podcast called Cautionary Tales that you may want to go and have a look up, and you can hear the whole story about how the system led up to this event, where all the different elements of the way the cards and the presenters and people giving out the cards for them to read, how the system all worked to mean that actually somebody got up on the stage and read out the wrong card. It's just going right back to the beginning, where I started to say humans make mistakes. It's just we are going to get distracted. There's going to be days where it's crazy, and you just have to make sure that you've got a system in place that can cope with those mistakes. And you know, we can't get better humans, so we need to get better systems, really. The next slide is just a slight digression as well. There's a really interesting book called Normal Accidents by Charles Perrault, who's it's quite an old book. It's back from the 80s, I think, but he just talks about how when an accident happens, your instant reaction is to blame the operator. You know, when you maybe you say, oh, it was pilot error, you know, or something like that. But actually, in his book, he actually looks into the fact that it's systems have the human element, but they also have the technology element. And it's not the technology that's to blame, and it's not the human that's to blame. It's the way that those two work together. And you just have to bear in mind, going right back to the beginning, bear in mind how you use the system, what it is you're actually doing. You know, it's as an embryologist, it's your job to witness what you're doing, to be very present and very aware of what it is you're doing, and not relying on a system. However, there are days we're relying on the system, and just to bear in mind, you need a good design, you need clear communication of how the system works, what you're expecting from the system. I think certainly things that we've learned as we've been installing across the clinics, that you need to understand the system, you need to make sure that there's no unnecessary complexity within it. Certainly a phrase that I saw that was did kind of make me smile was saying, learning from other people's mistakes is much easier than learning from your own. So I'm certainly very happy to share, you know, things that we've got wrong, things that I think we got right from the start, and certainly reach out to me if anybody is installing this system and wants to learn from things that we've found as we've gone along. So I think that was my last slide. I think the last slide is just a few future developments that we're looking at. There are analytics within the RI Witness system that you can look at, for example, how long an embryologist has taken to do a certain procedure, how long, whether one workstation is used more than another, that kind of thing. We haven't looked at that too much at the moment. I think we're busy at the moment just focusing on the installation process. but we're certainly looking to use that a little bit more in the future, as well as the imaging software. You can actually connect the system to the cameras on your microscopes, and yeah, we're hoping to look into that a little bit as more. Traceability, we're using it very basically at the moment for traceability, but we would like to be able to make some improvements and get a little bit more out of the traceability aspect. And just to say that there is a roadmap of improvements that Cooper have already got underway, and yeah, just interact with that. I think Cooper are very interested to learn from people as well, from the users as well. They're very interested to have ideas about developments, maybe some more equipment and incubator traceability, so that we know which ICSI microscope we used, for example, or we can use the system to show, to record what incubator was used, how long it was out of the incubator, you know, things like that. They're all things to think about for the future. But yeah, really appreciate the ongoing support of the two product specialists, Nathan and Grant. I think, yeah, they've really just kept going they've gone with us and been really good source of support, as well as, you know, our account manager and Austin, and yeah, the whole team. They really, you know, they want you to get the best out of the system. They want you to be using the system the most effectively. So yeah, I think I'll end there. Just hopefully that's been useful for people that are thinking about installing the system.
That's been wonderful, Louise, and I'm loving the analogy that you had there with the Oscars. I think we might be borrowing that from you in the future. That worked really, really well.
Oh, you should listen to the podcast.
I will. That's a good recommendation. It's always great to have a user of the system talk us through their experience, and I think it really brings the subject alive, particularly with all the photos that you included as well. That was a really interesting talk. Thank you very much, Louise. So we've already had a number of questions that have come into the chat box about your experience with the system. So I turn now to the panel, if they'd all like to switch their webcams on. And I think we'll get going straight away with the questions if we can. So first question we've had coming, for those of your clinics who had zero experience of electronic witnessing before you brought in Witness, how did they react to the quite big changes in working practices, Louise?
Again, I think going back to the slide where I said, you know, all the staff need different ways of training. I think all the staff have their own way of reacting. I think there's some people that are really excited to be able to use it, really excited to know all the features. There's some embryologists who are a little bit resistant to change. They don't need it. It's the system we've got now is fine. So yeah, I think just as fortunately we'd made this decision to install our Eyewitness, we'd made it as a collaborative group. So we've got a super user in each clinic, and I really rely on them to drive it forward and keep the training going, keep the communication going with the team. I think once people see the system and they get their hands on it and they have a chance to see what it's about and what it can do, it's super easy to use once you actually, it's installed and the process map is right, and you know the technician is used to putting the tags on the dishes, and you know once there's a learning process, and we have manually witnessed alongside the Eyewitness system in all of the clinics until all the staff are happy with it and it's validated and it's being used correctly. I can't really say that there's a kind of one answer really to that question. I think everybody just I think just grasp onto the young ones that are really enthusiastic and understand the technology, and just use them to drag along the old folks like me who really don't understand how it works but love it.
Brilliant. That's great. Steve, I put the same question to you. You've installed our eyewitness system into a couple of clinics, and how did staff that you work with react to changes in working practices?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Emily. I think I'd agree with what Louise has said to a degree. But I've installed our eyewitness into 5 centres in my time. Although that, nothing like the scale of the task that Louise has got to take or is taken on. I think overwhelmingly the response has been positive from embryologists that I've worked with, and I think they find the reassurance that the system provides, together with the fact that because it works pretty much passively, it's not a nuisance to use as such, because the dishes are just recognised when you put them into the work area. The login's easy, that sort of thing. And to be perfectly honest, I've often heard embryologists that I've worked with use the phrase, "This is the best bit of kit we've ever bought," because it makes their life easier. I think that would be my answer to that.
Super. Thank you, Steve. Sally or Austin, have you got anything you'd like to add to that question?
Again, Louise and Steve, I mean, you've said most of it. When I'm going around speaking to labs, there's often 1-2 people who are reluctant to adopt new technology, whether it's for change in working practices or whether it's for cost reasons. But so what we tend to do is we tend to get those people into a clinic where they're using it, so they can see for themselves exactly what Steve just said, how easy it is, how much it's not a nuisance to use, it's easy to use. And I really find I'm definitely work like this, I have to touch it and get hands-on with it to really understand it properly. And I find that lots of people in the labs and in the clinic environment are the same. So, again, if you've got those sort of people who don't fully understand it, and that is probably leading to their reluctance, get them to a clinic and get them hands-on with it, and then they'll really understand it and see the benefits.
Brilliant, thank you. I like the idea of getting them into another clinic so they can see how it's become part of the structure and the fabric of the clinic. That's fabulous. I've got a quick question here, but to the point. What would happen if we forgot to tag a dish? Perhaps Sally and Austin, we come to you first with that one.
Don't know, Sally, do you want to go first with that, or?
If you forgot to tag a dish. Okay, so the way it works, again, this is part of the benefit, the beauty of being in a clinic, and you can test this sort of thing. I think probably as part of our implementation with care with Louise, we did all these tests. What do we do if this happens? So if you don't tag a dish, when you bring it to a work area, to a stereo zoom microscope, basically nothing happens. The system kind of looks at you and says, you can't do anything. You're not allowed to proceed to any next step because you haven't got a dish tag there. Now, the protocol of, once we've trained the staff is you interact with the system, you press the button depending on what technique you're wanting to do. And if you don't have a button to press, then you have not done something properly. So you need to look at what you're presenting to the microscope and work out what is wrong. So basically, if you didn't tag a dish, you couldn't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Austin, anything to add?
Yeah, also, I think if you didn't tag a dish, or if there was a tag failure, which we don't have many of, it would be a case of you would have a manual witnessing step in there. So you would have a separate protocol that you would need to follow. I think, Sally, is that correct? So
yeah,
your base embryology training comes in, and you would then formulate a manual witnessing process.
Yeah, and that would be part of our the backup plan if if for some reason the IT, the network, the electronics, the PC went down, you would fall back to your manual witnessing, albeit very temporarily, hopefully. But I think, so on the very rare occasion where you have a tag failure, and that can be caused by, incorrectly peeling it off and putting it on, which could break the circuit. Or in some cases, if there's been a spillage of oil, for example, on the stereo zoom, you haven't noticed, you put the dish on it, that can affect, it can affect kind of the tag on the bottom of the dish as well. Anyway, for whatever reason, if you needed to do a manual override into the system, you can. We call it an admin assign. So generally we set up the super users and the seniors as people who are able to do this admin assign, this manual override into the system. But the system also requires, so it lets them do this manual override, but it also requires a reason. And depending on what that reason is inputted as, you might see trends appearing in the system, trends of weak areas or weaknesses in the system. I'm trying to think of an example now. So, it could be simply a case of I need certain things in the work area to be able to proceed to the next step. And if I'm not doing that and I'm pressing the button, I then need somebody else to come in and basically change the name of my dish. So that is simply a question of more training for that member of staff or for the whole team if everybody's making the same mistake. The point is really that the system kind of will pick up these weak areas, these trends, and it will show you how you can improve.
Great. Thank you, Sally. Steve, I'd just like to pick up on something that Sally said there about tag failure rate. In your experience as a user of the system, is that something that you came across often?
No, quite the opposite, actually. Very, very infrequently indeed. I think you could, perhaps count almost on one hand the number of tags that failed in a 12-month period. And as Sally mentioned, the failure is almost always due to the way that the tag has been handled. So if they're not taken carefully off the sheet, if they're bent, if that breaks the aerial, which is a large part of the tag, then it's not going to work. But it's not an issue at all. They hardly ever fail.
Great, thank you for your reassurance on that one. Next question here. We've always been concerned about putting a witness reader on top of a heated work surface. How do your clinics find working on this raised platform? Perhaps Louise, that's something that you've come across, putting the witness system into the number of clinics that you have.
Yeah, we don't install it onto a heated work area. We actually switch off the hood heated element. So obviously the hood still functions, the flow still works, and the light still works if that's what you want to use, and the microscope controls still work, but we've just switched off the heated element. So we don't have any raised retrofitted work areas at all. I know in some of our smaller hoods we've had to raise up the G85 within the hood so that it's not sitting on the RI witness heated stage, but that's been absolutely fine with the hoods that we've had. That's been absolutely workable. I think if it's not workable within your hood, my suggestion would be to replace the hood and just have the integrated work area. But no, I would switch off the heated stage if you can.
Great, thank you. With addressing the specific concern about it being a raised platform, Sally, perhaps that's something that you can comment on in your experience?
Yeah, get it a lot. People are worried, unless they've been using one of those older stereos that have got the large light bases, they're a bit worried about working up a bit higher. But I mean, we find this is what we find. Once they start using it, it's such a large surface that you've got to work with, and actually the real area you're using is very small, and it's very near the center of the field of view of the microscope. So it is something that I find people are concerned about before they start using it, and once they start using it, never. I don't know if Steve has got any comments on that.
Yeah, I'd agree with you entirely, Sally. I think, I mean, clearly a flush-fitted reader is better, you know, in the sense that it's a smooth surface and it's easy to clean, etc., etc. But the reality, as you say, is that, you know, when embryologists are moving things in and out of workstations, they're not flailing their arms around. They're not, you know, they're holding that dish with maximum care. And I've never come across anybody sort of catching a dish on the edge of the plate if it's raised. It just doesn't happen. Embryologists just don't work like that. So I don't think that is a concern. I think people get used to the fact that they're working on a raised plate, which is quite a large raised plate, as Louise showed in some of her photographs. So I don't consider it an issue myself.
Great, thank you. Question here that's come in. We'll come to you first, Louise. I'm in charge of quality in a group in different countries. Do you have any advice for handling the 2 or 3 people across the team who have negative attitudes to the extra cost of electronic witnessing compared to manual witnessing?
Yeah, I think the cost is a consideration. Just a bit of experience about installing it in different countries. Yes, when we installed in Dublin, their regulatory body, HPRA is the HPRA, are very, they've got very different regulations as opposed to the HFEA in this country, and there's a lot more validation. There was a bigger validation exercise that we had to go through to satisfy the use in that country. I think, yeah, so you just have to bear that in mind. I would have just said about the tag damage before. One of the exercises that we had to carry out for the Dublin install was actually to try and not make a tag work. And we pretty much put it through everything that it could come across in use, scratching it in an incubator, on an incubator surface, soaking it with oil. We even soaked it with alcohol, even though we don't use alcohol within the lab. We soaked it with the cleaning products. The only way we could get it not to work was by scratching it with scissors, which we considered was probably not something that would happen within its normal working life. So we were very happy with the robustness of the tags. Just to go back to the previous question. Yes, I mean, compared to manual witnessing, the consumables and, you know, the hardware or extra bits of equipment that you want for the system, it is an extra cost. There's no doubt that. I think it's a decision that you have to make. In terms of efficiency, really, it's just not that efficient to have people just, you know, being distracted by having to witness somebody else, or just being in the lab because somebody might need a witness, waiting to get on to with a procedure because you're waiting for somebody to be able to witness you. It's just not very efficient. And there's extra bits that we're finding with the system, like the traceability, like the stock control. It just depends where you want to spend your money, really. I think that's what it comes down to. It's yeah, I think if you're thinking about quality management, I think it's got to be the way forward in terms of electronic witnessing, electronic traceability, electronic stock control, and all the, you know, the extra features and things that are going to be implemented. I think it's, you know, it by far and away beats, you know, human recording of things, and all the things that are associated with that, like in Steve's talk. Humans are infallible. We get distracted. We don't set out to misread something or not give something our full attention, but we all know that, you know, sometimes the lighting condition isn't right, or you don't really have the time, or the text is so small, you know, you're struggling to see it. It's just a reassurance for everybody really, to know that you've got an electronic record of what's happened in your lab. If you're happy with the information that you can see from human witnessing, that's fine, stick with it, but I would encourage them to visit a clinic that already has the system in use and is using to its full capacity, and just seeing the different features that that are associated. It's not just a witnessing system. It has all sorts of extra features that you know, I'm sure you would find beneficial.
Yeah, indeed. Oh.
Yeah.
Thanks, Louise. That's great. I've got a fabulous mental image of you guys doing your robustness tests on the tags there. That's wonderful. Steve, Steve, I'm going to come to you next, because you will have been in a situation where you've had to make business cases to put the RI witness system into different clinics. Perhaps you could give some insight into how you address this issue of costs.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a difficult one in some clinics, because there is a cost associated with having the system, and there's no getting away with that. But in a sense, certainly in the UK, we are in a fortunate position whereby having the need to perform witnessing is mandated. We don't have any choice. So therefore here, it's about doing that in a way that is most efficient and most effective, and the RI witness system ticks both of those boxes. But you know, there are the other benefits that Louise has covered. Are real benefits. The fact that you can get data about the timing of procedures, you know, the fact that you can use these data in terms of your quality control processes. All of these advantages, whilst they're very difficult to put a price on, you know, are definitely there. And also, you know, there is a time saving, for sure. We did some work when I worked in Liverpool, where we measured the amount of time that was taken to perform witnessing manually. This was for an ICSI cycle, and that came out at about 6.5 minutes. So of an embryologist's time across an ICSI cycle, that compared to 3.5 minutes using the electronic witnessing system. So a difference of 3 minutes isn't huge, but of course, if you multiply that up across a large clinic, or indeed across a large group of clinics like Care Fertility, then those things do become more important. And that doesn't take into account the amount of time when people are manually witnessing that they have to wait for their colleague sitting there going, "Can I have a witness, please? Can I have a witness, please?" You know, so we weren't able to measure that as such.
I think there's a great point that you both make, that obviously people are going to ask about costs, but there are many other benefits of the system. Austin and Sally, I'll come to you, because you will obviously experience people asking questions about costs and so on, and I wonder if you've got any ways and means that customers have overcome this potential objection internally.
Yeah, so there are a variety of ways that the system can be paid for, and we are open to adapting our payment process, and that can be as a capital purchase with a lower tag price, or a higher tag price, and then you'll purchase your equipment through the tags. Credit sale. We're currently running a deferred payment scheme at the moment, so that we can defer payments, the start of the payments to September, which is very good at the moment, because obviously with cash flow for private clinics during lockdown. So we're open to various plans and ideas, and to try and help you set up the witness system in your lab.
That's great. Thank you, Austin. And I think if any customers from the UK and Ireland would like to explore those opportunities, please don't hesitate to get in contact with us. Sally, have you got anything that you would like to add?
I'll add the opposite, if I may. I had one clinic, not in the UK, who decided, okay, well, we're going to recoup the costs by charging the patients for an extra fee for using the electronic witnessing system. And then we sat down and bashed that thought process through with them. And actually that wouldn't work, because then you're basically giving them an option. You're saying, okay, well, actually, you can choose to have this extra kind of witnessing or not. And if they opted out of it, what would happen in the lab is that you're going to have some dishes which are tagged and some dishes which aren't tagged. So it doesn't work like that. Don't think that you can pass the cost on as a direct extra cost to the patients. Of course you can, you'll just have to kind of just put it into the overall cost. It can't be a separate thing that they can opt in and out of.
That's a great point, Sally. Yeah, thank you for
So
making that.
just as another thing as well, we can also look at the number of tags you're using and give you an estimate, and look at the actual costs that it would cost to do a witness system for you for, let's say, a per cycle or an IVF patient, and we can give those to you, and actually it doesn't work out to be a great deal.
No, and again, if anyone's watching this and they're interested in that, please do follow up with us afterwards. Got a question here that's possibly slightly controversial. Do you think having an electronic witnessing system can make staff more complacent? Steve, perhaps we come to you first on this one.
That's a really interesting question. I think there is perhaps a danger of that happening, but I think what is important is that we recognise, and that embryologists, when they're trained to use the system, are trained that it is a secondary witnessing system. It isn't designed to replace their eyes. So the dishes will be labelled in addition to the tag. So I think this is a training issue. I think people need to be, it needs to be made very clear that it is a witnessing system, and it isn't to allow them to never look at a dish again because the machine is doing it for them. I think that would be my answer there.
Great point. Louise, any thoughts on your staff potentially becoming complacent?
Yeah, I mean, I would say absolutely. I'd say I think people get comfortable with it. I'd go right back to the beginning when I was saying that it's your responsibility as a trained scientist, as a professional, to be your own witness, to look at what you're doing. It is your responsibility. If you're moving gametes or embryos, it's your responsibility to check that you're doing the right thing. And this system is just a witness of what you're doing. So, I mean, we've had this sort of time and time again, really, and I'm not being patronising by saying, you know, the younger embryologists have only ever had a witnessing system that is checking their work. They've not had to work anywhere where they've been on their own and been solely responsible for what they're doing. And it just is down to staff education of it's your responsibility to be checking. And I know sometimes you open the incubation door and you expect a dish to be in a certain place, and maybe you just kind of like pick it up without looking at it properly, and it comes into the workstation and it's a mismatch, and that's going to happen. But if you're actually carrying out a procedure, moving things between dishes, and it goes back to the question about the untagged dish, it's your responsibility to carry out that procedure. It's your responsibility to gain a witness for what you've done. That's a regulatory requirement that Steve spoke about, that was introduced by the HFEA. It's your responsibility to get a witness for what you are doing. And whether that's a human witness or an electronic witness, that's just what it is you have to take it very responsibly, and yeah, just staff education as to not fall into that complacency or thinking that the system is there to keep an eye on you. It's just there to witness what you've done. For your reassurance, for the patient reassurance, you know, small things, we're constantly saying, you know, a small little error that you may think is, you know, non-consequential. It was nothing. It was fine. We actually have a very good internal reporting system within care, where we report everything, a near miss, a little incident, and we try and learn from that and go forward, because a very small thing that you don't think is very important can cascade through the system and cause, you know, catastrophic consequences of something that you've done that is just perhaps, you know, just to you a small problem. So yeah, I would just, it's education, it's reporting every small thing that you think, oh, this wasn't right, or that didn't work very well, or yes, sometimes somebody didn't put a tag on the dish. We just keep reporting it, and we just keep reiterating it. It's crucial. It's, you know, it's your job leads on to somebody else's job, leads on ultimately to the patient and the patient safety and the patient reassurance that everything is done absolutely right.
Great.
So just, yeah, staff education and the constant re-educating and reminding to try and avoid that complacence. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Actually, Emily, Sally and I had a conversation last week actually about putting a witness system into a new clinic would often highlight a number of issues. You may get more alarms earlier on because it highlights some perhaps complacency from manual witnessing or from other systems where the system itself is highlighting issues, as opposed to that's a problem. You just need to go back and look at those SOPs.
Good point. Thank you for that. Let's move on. Just got a couple more questions. How easy was it to get all clinics working in the same way? Louise?
For us, it's what we do. So surprisingly, within the, you know, our group of clinics, surprisingly quite easy. I think so we have got new clinics. We've acquired new clinics since we started into implementing this system, and it's just a matter of comparing your witness maps, comparing the way you work, and as we're integrating them to within the care group and the way we do things, it's a long-term project. It's not something you do overnight. You just gradually compare piece by piece by piece as you're going along to see where the best practice is. Yeah,
and I guess the
best practice, really, just comparing practices and debating it out, trying one way, trying another way, and then deciding on what's the best practice for you. Yeah, it's not, we haven't found it a major problem, but that's the way we work anyway. So that's been quite straightforward.
I guess with the very high level of standardisation you have in care, that's probably made it easier for you. Sally, Austin, Steve, I don't know if you've got any comments that you can make about, say, a group of clinics trying to work all in the same way with the RI witness system.
Yeah, I guess embryologists are inherently protective of the way that they've developed things within their own clinic, and there is sometimes resistance to change. But what I have seen when we've put RI witness into different clinics and tried to standardise is that there's often a very healthy exchange of good ideas, where one clinic will go, oh, actually, that's a much better way of doing it, and in fact, some of those that sort of exchange of information has come through, you know, through the product specialists that have installed the machines. When the witness point diagrams have been you know, have been formulated, they've said, is this, what about doing it like this, you know, in a very respectful way. So yeah, again, I don't see it as a huge problem to standardise.
And let me just recall, we installed a system into a big clinic in Korea, and it had 3 different embryology labs all on different floors. So we got the lab manager of each of the labs together so that we could build this witness point diagram, the flow of steps, if you like. And in terms of sperm prep, we couldn't get any one of the labs to agree. They all did it differently, even though they were all supposed to be doing it the same. So they were all like, oh, you do it like that. Oh, you do it like that. Okay. So then we made actually able to standardize, even within one lab, how they were doing something.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I'll move on to our last question, and this is a fabulous question. It wins the question not only of the day, but almost of the year award. So does the panel think if there is an RFID chip in the Oscars envelope that they can prevent the same mistake happening again that happened in the 2018 Oscars? I'm loving it. Just a yay or a nay, I think, from the panel members on this one.
Yeah, I think we could figure something out for them.
We'd have to tag the recipient.
You'd have to tag the recipient. Exactly, Austin.
Super. Oh, that's wonderful. So thank you so much. Thank you very much to Louise for speaking for us this afternoon. It's been a pleasure to have you with us, Louise, and hear your experiences. And thank you also to Steve for the introduction and answering the questions. And thank you also to Austin and Sally for being our experts and joining us on the panel this afternoon. And also a huge thank you to everybody who's joined us this lunchtime, whether you're in a clinic or in the lab or at home. Thank you so much. We hope you've enjoyed the presentations and the questions, and we look forward to seeing you again soon at another one of our webinars. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank you.